So Ryan Payne's letter went out contradicting his story that he has put out there about what happened at the ranch. This is my side. I can only tell you what I think and feel about the subject. I went to the ranch with a couple friends of mine because we saw some heavy-handed nature from the BLM and saw a free speech zone. And I've said this numerous times, but the reason I went out and said this numerous times publicly was because friends of mine after the ranch sent me links to Ryan Payne's interviews. And they said, man, do you know this guy? He's talking about this crazy plan and putting people in positions and the plan to take the cattle back and all these other crazy statements. And I would listen to these interviews, and I'll be honest, it made me sick because nothing like that happened at the ranch. There was no plan. There was no positions, teams. There was nothing like that. The closest thing to a plan was to do security at the stage where Cliven and the sheriff were talking because the sheriff's department wouldn't bring out officers to do crowd control. That was the only thing was to watch the crowd because they had already made crazies like Amanda and Jared Miller leave. They were felons with guns, and they seemed like they were on drugs and saying some red flag statements, and they made them leave. There was a guy walking around with a broadsword, and they made him leave. So they already had some weirdos hanging out, and they just asked that we watch the crowd while Cliven talked to the sheriff. That was the only thing that was ever asked of me. So in his statements, he would say that there was these plans and everybody was on the same page. And when I heard those, I went out as quick as I could and gave public interviews to what I called my side of the story. My side of the story was a lot different. And lo and behold, here we are 2.5 years later, and my side of the story is the truth. I've always tried to tell the truth because, as Twain says, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said. And I've always tried to tell the truth. And the truth is there was no plan. And I don't even ever really remember talking to Ryan Payne or anybody. I met most of these people I'm involved in this, quote, conspiracy with in jail. There was no plan to get the cattle back. The first time we ever heard about the wash was when the protesters decided to go over there and protest the BLM. It was only a protest. They had lots and lots of guns pointed at them while they were protesting, threats to open fire in the wash. So back to Ryan Payne, though. When we spoke to Ryan Payne over, I met him the first time I met him was in Burns, Oregon. I asked him, what was with the interview? What was with Buddha Cavalier getting on Vice and trying to say we had counter snipers and quoting Sun Tzu like an asshole, excuse my language, in that wash to Vice, The two of them basically made a plan, what they call a psyop, to trick the federal government. And in Ryan Payne's defense, he's military, and that's what the military taught him, is if you're a small force, unorganized, you make yourself look like a big force and organized. He says that he did that in those interviews, and Buddha did those interviews to try to keep the government thinking that people could respond in an organized manner, which wasn't the case. Nobody ever tried to keep law enforcement away from the Bundys. It was actually the opposite. People that were there watching the Bundys was to keep an eye on their family. They were in the public eye. They had death threats on the internet because of some of Cliven's comments. But those same people that were there protecting the family went to the sheriff's department and said, hey, if you have a warrant, just call us and Cliven will come right down and turn himself in. The narrative has always been false coming out of Ryan Payne and Brian Cavalier's camp. And for whatever reason, they justify it, but it does have us all here now in a conspiracy, a quote conspiracy indictment. If you read the indictment, it reads exactly as one of Ryan Payne's interviews. The government took his narrative and cut and pasted it into this indictment. we are staring at the discovery. This is where it gets interesting. We're staring at the discovery, and you can basically see that his narrative was wrong in the discovery, that he was not telling the truth, not being honest. And so I have to imagine that the government knows that that's the case, you know. I was talking with some people here who had looked at that discovery with me, and basically what it seemed like was they had his narrative and interviews, and they had my narrative and interviews, and they looked at both of them, and they said, well, we can indict for conspiracy and extortion and all these other charges on his interviews. And mine were basically the opposite of that. You know, now if the government was hoping that he was telling the truth and I was lying, maybe. But as we look at the discovery, you know, it's pretty plain to see that there's no real proof of what he was alleging. So here we are. He put this letter out after we asked him what he planned on doing to clear it up, if anything. He said that he wanted to put out a letter basically telling him the truth. Now, I don't know if that's going to help anything as far as our case is concerned or not, but it is the truth. So, you know, we feel like the truth needs to be out there. And apparently he did too. He did say things like he was remorseful that all of our families were dealing with this because of the way he went about doing things and the things he said. So that is what it is as far as his letter. I just wanted to kind of clear it up and give my point of view on that.